everybody. This is Jess from 3D Learning Experts, and you're listening to the LD Experts Podcast, the show for busy parents who want to help their kids with learning disabilities, or as I like to say, learning differences, go from surviving to thriving. Hello, everybody. Today, we are talking with Joshua, who is an expert in, so many things. LDs, autism, dyspraxia, LGBT, and there's probably even more things that I didn't mention. So Joshua comes to us from Santa Cruz, so we're kind of neighbors. And I am so excited to be able to talk with you today, Joshua. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so let's start with your dyslexia and your dyspraxia, since that is what my audience is definitely about, and then we can go on from there. What helped you identify that you had dyslexia and dyspraxia?
I first identified with dyspraxia of those two after I realized I was autistic, did, a lot of reading and learning about autism and started to see that there's a lot of overlap in other neurominority identities and conditions, like dyspraxia is a really big one. And so as I started to learn about dyspraxia, because I'd never even heard of that term.
Yeah, can you share what it is? Because a lot of people may not know what dyspraxia is.
Yeah, so from like a really basic perspective, it's another sort of developmental delay, or there's an overlap between development and biology, similar to dyslexia, and it affects a part of the brain that connects us with our proprioception, with our ability to sort of comprehend our body within space, and difficulty coordinating those movements consciously, whereas people without this condition, this part of their brain sort of just functions automatically and they take it for granted. They just don't even realize, right, that these are conscious things, because for them it's really unconscious, and for people with the condition it has to become conscious. And that really made a lot of sense for me in the context of my life, who, as a person who started practicing martial arts from like the age of 12, and seeing how that's really helped me with that condition, live with that condition without even knowing it. And there were also like a lot of ways that I've learned to adapt to my other conditions that I didn't know, like autism and dyslexia. And these things I feel like sort of lent themselves to preventing me from identifying with them in a way, in addition to just my ignorance about these conditions. And I feel like there was lots of signs, like if I had known about these things and if my parents had known about these things, they definitely would have been identified, because they were all things that were like talked about, like all of my symptoms, they were all very visible. But my parents just, and me, didn't know anything about a lot of the really prevalent symptoms of these conditions because they weren't taught about them. Like my sensory processing disorder, for example, has always been just like super prevalent, and like I had eczema, just extreme eczema from a really young age. Like literally had to put cream over my entire body. I had issues with picking the scabs of the eczema. I was really sensitive to sights and sounds and textures. Like my parents like really struggled to find me clothing that I would wear. Like I was literally like just like a nudist, because like I just couldn't stand like the textures of hardly anything. And so these things were all very known, but just
not knowing what the cause was of them. Yes. I experienced the same thing as a parent. Well, and as a kid, and had no clue. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a bit about how I started to understand my dyspraxia, and it really like learning all of the subtleties about how it's difficult to coordinate movements. I really started to reprocess a lot of memories where this condition affected my life, and I didn't know it was affecting my life, didn't know how to respond to the situations. Like I would always, like when I was walking with friends, you know, on the street, on the sidewalk, like I would always be like bumping into them, and people would like say something like, why are you walking into me? Like it's intentional, you know, but I'm just like, I don't know, you know what I mean? Like I just can't walk straight. Like, and like, you know, like when I would hang out with people of the opposite sex, they would get uncomfortable, be like, why are you trying to touch my hand? I'm like, I'm not. But I didn't know what to say because I didn't know what was happening. I also felt uncomfortable that I presented in a way that was seen as abnormal. And so that like really just shut me down. So it was really helpful for me to identify with these terms, because I can make a lot of sense of that stuff now. And as an autistic person who's just like always perseverating, has great memory, I think about these memories all the time. So it's helpful for me to reprocess them in a way that I can like give myself compassion.
So how did you discover that you had all of these neurodiversities, or what is the term you used? I've never heard that one before.
Like neurominority identities.
Neurominority.
Yeah, I think, I mean, and they're really prevalent conditions. I mean, like dyslexia being like one of the most commonly identified learning disabilities at like 10% of the population. Like that's a lot of people. But yeah, it's still, you know, it's still the minority. I would say it's a challenging conversation for me to like think about like neurotypical compared to like, you know, neurodiverse or neurodivergent, because to me that like, I don't know, it just seems kind of othering. Like we diverge from this typical that is like, you know, maybe better because it's what's supposed to be normal. Whereas I see all these variations as normal variations of human development.
Well, and you don't think of a minority being othering? To me, that's, oh, okay.
Yeah.
I was going to say, to me, that's kind of othering as well.
Exactly. Yeah, that's my issue with like some of these terms, that's why I use the term neuroqueer, because I feel like it's less othering.
But that term would only work for someone who's part of the LGBTQ community, right?
Not necessarily, because it's not queer in the sense of like gender. I mean, it might be in gender or in sexuality, but it's like by attaching like neuro to it, it's really just specifically talking about how the brain is queer, how the brain is different from other brains. And So I kind of like it because I feel like it doesn't necessarily have to be associated with gender or sexuality, but it also can if you view the brain as sort of the home of those identities, and you associate your neurological condition with the development of those identities.
Wow, that's a lot. And you explain it so well. So thank you for that. So you were older when you started learning all of these things about yourself, correct?
Yeah. I was like 26 when I learned I was autistic.
And so finding out you're autistic at 26, is there, maybe this is not even an appropriate question to ask, but it's on my mind for my own personal knowledge. Because in California, if you're identified as autistic, you can get government assistance. However, I know they're not very apt to identify people as autistic for that reason. So I'm just wondering, like, were you identified by a doctor where you can get assistance, and how did you go about doing that if you were?
Yeah, I really feel like I did get a diagnosis from a doctor. But initially I really just self-identified as autistic. Like when I finally realized it, like on my own, through my own discovery, because to answer your earlier question, like how I kind of came to this conclusion and like why I was doing this searching was because I've just been suicidal and depressed my entire life and never known why, and have been to therapy since I was, under 10, and continuously through an adult, and could never identify, even with support, why I just didn't want to live. And so I've been constantly searching for answers to my condition. And one day I just read an article written by an autistic adult who, similar to me, wasn't realized as autistic until they were an adult. They really just succinctly explained their experiences that went undiagnosed, unrecognized as autistic experiences, and just like really resonated with me. Like almost every single experience that they had was an experience that I shared. And so I just kept reading and finding articles through other articles and reading more experiences of autistic adults, and it just kept resonating. And I was just like, I'm autistic. It just felt right, and just instantly made my brain like reprocess everything in my life just like by itself through this new lens. And yeah, so I'm really grateful to all the people who have had the courage and the energy and capacity to share their stories, because that's what helped me realize.
Well, I was thinking about something you had said when we spoke earlier, and you said self-diagnosis of autism is valid. And when you were sharing right now, we took my child to the doctor to find out what was going on with him. And we filled out the form about autism, and they said he was not autistic, that he had sensory processing disorder, which I definitely accept he has sensory processing disorder, because that explains so many issues he had from the time he was 6 months old. Mm-hmm. And it was interesting you were talking about the eczema, because he had the worst eczema of all my kids, although it did go away at 2 or 3, but I didn't realize that was probably a correlation with it. But anyway, they said he was not autistic. And I mean, I definitely believe that he is autistic. So the professionals did not catch that he is autistic. And then my other son went to a therapist who suggested that he is autistic, and he tried to be tested by the doctor at 24 and they refused. So, we definitely do not need medical professionals to help us determine what our neurodivergence or neurominorities are, as you know just as well as I do.
Yeah. Yeah. And at the same time, there's a need for those people to be educated better to work with this population.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, because I find with dyslexia, like people who do the testing, they know how to perform the tests, but they don't know anything about dyslexia. So, they're like, okay, you're dyslexic. And the parents are like, well, what do we do now? And they're like, well, we don't know. Go Google it.
Yeah. The doctor that I saw was not super helpful. Like she literally never even said any of my diagnoses that she gave me. She was like really trying to avoid almost like this labeling. And for me, that was really off-putting because it's like I like the labels, you know what I mean? Like she just never really listened to anything about like my perspective, like what you know what I mean? Like what I identify with. And it was really weird because it kind of left me with this feeling that like she didn't believe that I was autistic, even though she like wrote it on the paper, like it seemed like she was trying to influence me to not identify with the label and to identify more with like my experiences and like just generally the things that I struggle with and how to solve those things. Like she basically insinuated like you have a shit way of processing things and you should improve that. And I'm like, I didn't like this experience. This wasn't.
Well, and autism has a negative connotation to it. I mean, I think it's getting better. I think more people are realizing that they're autistic. I know I am just realizing that I too am on the spectrum. But I can't even say I am autistic. I can just say I am on the spectrum because that sounds like a better, I don't know, it's just an easier word to say. So, our society has made it such a negative word too.
Yeah, I work with somebody who has a child who's autistic and she always says he's on the spectrum. And I'm like, he's autistic. Like, just say it. Like, I have a shirt that says autistic and disability are not bad words. Because like, people just like have this way of like avoiding the language because they just assume that it's like offensive or something. And it's kind of stigmatizing.
Yeah. Well, I wrote a blog years ago and someone said, why do you need to label? And I think you probably feel the same as me. And sorry if I am providing you with your feelings. So, let me know what your thoughts are. But I feel like labels make us feel like we belong to something. We're not alone in our experiences. It's not isolated, which is probably what you were feeling growing up, which is why you felt suicidal. Am I right in that thought process?
Yeah, huge. Like I describe it as like 50% of my depression just basically evaporating when I realized that I was autistic, because half of my depression was just from realizing that I'm not weird, right? Like I'm not necessarily even different. Like there's millions of other people just like me. And all of a sudden I didn't feel alienated. I didn't feel isolated. I felt like a part of a community, especially when I reached out to that community, and felt so welcomed. And that's been super healing for me.
Yeah. You know, this conversation, I really need to learn to deal with autism better, because I can easily say which one of my kids have dyslexia, but I'm not as comfortable to say which one of my kids has autism.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I need more work.
Yeah, even me. It's definitely a humbling experience, and just goes to show that it's so much more complex than we've been understanding.
Well, and autism is unique to each individual, just like everything is unique to each individual.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like having that standardized understanding of all of these conditions is what's been so hard for many people to identify with them, is because they're like, well, I don't see letters backwards, so I'm not dyslexic, right? But it's like, for me, the issue was I skipped over articles like in or an or the, and I started reading pages from the middle or paragraphs from the middle or from the end instead of from the beginning. Like all of these different things that like I was never told are dyslexia.
Mm-hmm. Right, because people think dyslexia is reversing letters or things moving on the page, which aren't even dyslexia.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah. So I would assume that you struggled in school with these different learning challenges, and you didn't even know what was going on. Can you give us a day in the life?
Yeah. So a day in the life. I was in the principal's office every day.
Oh, so was I.
I just, right, like a lot of my struggles with not being identified as disabled just led me to being frustrated and displayed through my behavior and like acts of aggression, because I didn't understand what was happening. I didn't understand why I was frustrated. Because people always identified me as a bright person, somebody without disabilities, somebody neurotypical. And it was so interesting that throughout all of these behavioral challenges, like nobody ever like screened me for any of these conditions. Nobody ever was just like, maybe it's an issue with the way that they're being taught, you know? But like literally elementary school, middle school, high school, I was in the principal's office every day getting in trouble for things, failing my classes. Yeah.
Yeah, wow. So for me, it was just elementary school that I got into trouble. By the time I got to middle school, I was no longer spending my days in the principal's office. But so for you, it was your whole entire academic career. That is amazing that you went on to college after having such a bad experience until then.
Mm-hmm.
What made you decide to continue your education?
I had this idea that college would be different.
And was it?
That gave me hope, you know. It definitely wasn't exactly what I expected. I was very disappointed by all the general education requirements that you need to satisfy like going straight in, because my understanding was like more that you had a choice of, right, like of your education, of the classes that you take in their subjects. And that was, not as expected, a harsh reality. But it was still better than high school, I felt, because I was still learning about things that were not available to me in high school, like general psychology. Like in my first year of comprehensive high school, my parents were like, this probably isn't working out. Maybe you should find like a better school that works for you. So I tried independent studies. That didn't work because I couldn't do my work by myself. So I went to an alternative school, and so that there weren't a lot of resources. Like I know sometimes at high schools they offer like psychology classes and things, but my school was like super bare bones. Is all I could make it through. It's the only high school I could graduate from, and I did. So that's great. I ultimately came away with the understanding of like, as long as you get the high school diploma, that's good enough, because then you can just go on to, to really make more independent decisions. And yeah, I did enjoy it kind of, but I came away from my undergraduate experience feeling like the education was still similar to what I experienced in grade school, where you didn't really learn a lot about like how to apply any of these concepts in real life. I walked away with it feeling like I don't know if I learned very much about how to actually work with people. I just kind of learned about a bunch of ideas from a bunch of like really problematic people from history. And yeah, it was a struggle even to get through university. It took me like 6 years to do my bachelor's. And yeah, definitely some of the darker times of my life emotionally. But I got through it, and master's programs are definitely a lot better than undergraduate, I could say from my experience at least.
So, and what is your master's? Or have you completed that yet, or are you still working on completing that?
Yeah, I finished it last year. It's in social work, and I got my bachelor's in psychology and human sexuality.
And so now, do you feel like your education will help you with your profession?
Yeah, I feel like I was really privileged to go to UC Berkeley. I feel like my professors were really experienced and just adept at sharing all of the knowledge that they have. Yeah, I still look back on a lot of them as really influential people for me in how I approach this work. But I got to say, like, I've learned a lot in my year and a half now after graduation, just getting clinical supervision. I've learned so much from clinical supervision, earning my hours toward my license, that I never even learned in graduate school. So there's definitely a lot missing, especially in terms of disability.
And so what are you working towards doing professionally?
So I'm earning my hours towards my license in clinical social work, so that I can start a private practice. And I am currently developing a trauma-informed martial arts therapy curriculum that I plan to use in my private practice, doing individual and group martial arts therapy.
And so what is your focus? What kind of trauma, or all trauma?
All trauma. I particularly identify with and am passionate about working with survivors of sexual trauma. But I mean, because this modality applies across the board, I really don't want to limit it to any population of people that experiences trauma.
Mm-hmm. And so how long do you think it'll be before you get that off the, what's the word term, off the ground? Yeah, I think that's
it. When I get it flying, probably about like a year and a half, I would say, is kind of my goal.
And how are you feeling? You know, you had mentioned as a child you were suicidal. Do you still have thoughts of suicide, or is that behind you?
Yeah, I still have a lot of thoughts of suicide. I still struggle with it on mostly a daily basis, because, you know, as I mentioned, like that 50% of my depression evaporating was significant, but like I'm still significantly depressed as well. And I think the reason that, you know, learning that I'm disabled has not necessarily relieved all of that is because I've realized that a lot of my depression is just from my empathy and my sort of inability to disconnect from the suffering that is experienced like constantly around the world. It's hard for me to identify as a human being when I don't identify with a majority of the things that human beings are doing. So for me, it's a really conflicting thing. And a part of why Buddhism has always been really helpful for me in working on like perspectives of non-attachment and equanimity.
Yet that hasn't helped you to detach and not feel so sad about the state of the world.
Yeah, I think it's really deeply tied to my trauma, my development throughout adverse childhood experiences. I really see it as sort of a developmental delay in my ego, right? And I think a lot of people who experience adverse childhood experiences and trauma through development, share this a lot of the times, which is, because we are evolutionarily designed to be egocentric as children, as babies, infants, because it's, key to our survival. And ultimately we strive to, unlearn that and find this way to detach from that ego. But like for me, I just really have not learned to do that because so much of my trauma that I experienced is wrapped up in my positive qualities like empathy, like I'm empathic to a fault, I could say, right? To the point
Definitely
where it
to
becomes
your
kind of
fault.
a negative quality.
Yeah, it's definitely, I don't want to say to your fault, like the word fault, like it's your fault, but it's definitely a disadvantage for you, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Have you read The Power of Now?
Mm-hmm.
That didn't help either, huh?
No, I was not. Yeah. I was not super connected with his writing. I feel like, yeah, it just didn't resonate with me. Like this like sudden transformation, right? Like it's so easy, just do this.
Well, it's more like focus on the now, and so that you're not so worried about the future. I don't know. I'm reading it right now, and what you were saying, like, put all those pieces together for me. So
yeah, and yeah, I think what I've learned is that, yeah, those things can be easier said than done. Mm-hmm. But it's all a process, and I think it's hard when you're just comparing your experience with one other person's experience. In the case of Eckhart Tolle, reading about his experience and his process, right, is not necessarily going to be the same as mine.
Right.
So, yeah, I don't know. I think, yeah, everybody can get there, but it just takes something different for everybody because, yeah, we're all coming from different places neurologically and
different trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's why I love therapy so much, is because I really do feel like it's important for everybody to do this searching for themselves, because we all go through our own experiences. It's not always as easy as trying to relate to other people.
All right. So, can you talk a little bit more about neuroqueer and how that plays into your life?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. for me, what I've really loved about neuroqueer as a term and identity is its allowance for flexibility. I think it's really just interesting all the ways that it can be applied. For example, if somebody identifies with even one type of neurodivergent identity, they could identify as neuroqueer. And at the same time, somebody with multiple neurodivergent identities, their identification with the term neuroqueer might be a bit different, because it encompasses sort of like all the ways that those different neurodevelopments intersect, and sort of create the whole. And it's also a way to think about the brain as associated with the development of our other identities, or our connections with other identities. People describe, a lot of autistic people to describe their condition as affecting their ability to connect with a sense of gender, for example. So their identity with gender is wrapped up with their identity with their neurodevelopmental condition. And in that way, neuroqueer kind of encompasses all aspects of that. And additionally, it allows for everybody to sort of identify with their experiences as a contribution to that identity, right? Because by definition, it is continually being defined by its differences that are displayed or, observed. And yeah, I think it just allows for like a lot of personal freedom and acceptance in being who we are and who we want to be.
So do you find that a lot of non-binary people are on the spectrum, are autistic?
Yeah. I guess I find that a lot of autistic people identify as non-binary or gender non-conforming.
So is it more that way than the other way?
Seemingly, at least in my experience, but I mean, who knows? I mean, I've met a lot of trans people, a lot of, non-binary, gender non-conforming people. So a lot of them didn't necessarily identify as autistic, but I mean, maybe they are and they don't know it yet. I do feel like, yeah, the overlap between the gender non-conforming identities and autism seems to be significant. I mean, in addition to the fact that the prevalence rate of autism continues to increase as more people are diagnosed.
And what are your thoughts about that? I mean, 20 years ago, they were assuming autism was caused by vaccines, or I heard that there's a test right now, or they're putting a case that autism is caused by baby food. I mean,
I haven't heard that one.
Yeah, I just actually heard it this week on the news. And so, I mean, I'm starting to believe that autism is like dyslexia, dysgraphia, that, some of us have that just in our family genes. And I think the way our society is laid out, it's becoming more and more noticeable because there's more and more restrictions on people than maybe 200 years ago, when people were working out in the farm and doing their own thing most of the day. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts about autism and where it comes from?
It's a great question. I would say I really don't know. I feel I like not knowing, because because for me, I just feel like to say that I know something would probably be, I would not be naming something else that might be also a potential cause or origin. Because I don't feel very confident based on the way we've been able to study autism scientifically, like that we really know. I like kind of keeping the possibilities open, except for obviously like really extreme ones that have already been studied and discounted.
Such as,
like vaccinations. I'm trying to think of, that's like really the only big one that stands out for me. I don't know if I've heard too many other like causes of autism that are like questionable outside of that one.
well, like they're trying to say it's caused by baby food. I know my kids did not turn out autistic from baby food because I made their baby food with a little grinder. So I definitely can say that is not a leading factor to my kids being autistic.
Yeah, I definitely see the genetic thing like a lot, especially in my family. And at the same time, it's really interesting to consider how there's also a lot of intergenerational trauma wrapped up in that. It's a very much like a chicken or the egg kind of thing. Like, did the trauma generate this pattern of behavior, or was the trauma generated by the condition naturally by ignorance of that condition? It's really challenging to say, except for the things that are not necessarily conditioned, like my sensory processing, right? Like I didn't learn to be really sensitive to textures, I don't think, but I don't know, maybe I did, right? Maybe there were some experiences I had around textures that were traumatic for me.
Well, like I said, my youngest son, he had sensory issues, as we now realize, as early as 6 months old. We couldn't leave him in the nursery at church because the noise was too much for him and he would cry the whole time. And I was doing real estate when my youngest two kids were both born and tried to put my kids in daycare part-time so that I would have time to do my paperwork. And he cried for the entire month that we gave daycare a try. And we had no clue why, why he had these issues until he was 12 years old and the doctor diagnosed him with sensory processing disorder or delay. I don't think it's a delay. I guess eventually you start to adjust the things better. But like when we would sing in the car, he would tell us to turn down the radio because his ears were very sensitive. And the same thing with like you, he was the fourth kid, so he had a ton of clothes because he had so many hand-me-downs. And I occasionally bought him his own clothes as well, but he would hardly wear any of them. There would be maybe 5 shirts he would wear all the time and 1 pair of pants that he would wear. For me as a kid, I couldn't get my toenails clipped with nail clippers and I hated wearing socks. And so those were my big sensory issues. But so, it wasn't until recently I realized that would correlate with the sensory processing, issues that he has or had. Yeah, he still has them. He's just, he still doesn't wear a whole lot of outfits. And one time he told me he liked these pants that I got at Old Navy And so I bought him 3 pairs, and he didn't like all 3 pairs. He only liked like 1 or 2 of them. So I don't know if it was the fabric was softer on 2 of them than the 3rd one or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really interesting how, yeah, it's everybody has their different preferences, and it can be really challenging to get that information, especially from a younger person who has a hard time identifying those things verbally.
Well, and as parents, it's unfortunate that we don't realize that our kids aren't doing this to just be difficult.
Mm-hmm.
There's a reason why they're being difficult. And maybe the future generation, your generation, or the next generation will start to realize that and spend more time trying to figure out maybe why their child can't handle the noise or is so picky about tags on their clothing. I mean, I used to cut the tags off of everything he wore. So that situation, I just took care of it. That was an easy one to resolve. Mm-hmm. But the noise one, I mean, we just kept sending him back to the problems, not knowing that it wasn't going to get better if we just kept exposing him to it.
Yeah. Yeah. I couldn't eat like anything growing up. And my parents were divorced. They struggled as single parents, raising 3 kids. And you have to, right, like get creative with your time, and like you're making the same meal for like 4 people. And how can you expect everybody to eat the same thing if they all have different preferences? But like, that's what happened in my household. And so my mom would force me to sit at the table until I ate my food, which was never. So I would just sit at the table for hours and cry.
Oh, wow.
Right. And that was really traumatic for me. And there was really no like effort to just be like, what is it about the food that's hard for you to eat? And how can we adjust those factors so that you can eat some food? But my mom just didn't have the capacity to do that as a single parent, and she didn't have support. So yeah, definitely. I would hope that, yeah, people can start to have a little bit more compassion around those kinds of things. But at the same time, like, I understand, like, parenting is really challenging.
Right. Yeah, it is. I mean, that's definitely hard when you're on a really fixed income and you're a single parent without anybody else to help relieve the stress. Mm-hmm. So is your palate still as selective, or where are you at?
I struggle to eat like every day. I mean, my relationship with food is really complicated at this point because I don't know if it's from the trauma or if it's part of my condition, right? Like, because I've always been a picky eater. But at the same time, I've started to realize that my relationship with food is a lot more complicated than that. Like, in general, I just don't have a drive to like food. Like, I have a biological ability to feel hunger and like know when I'm hungry. I have very uncomfortable hunger pangs that tell me you're hungry, but my brain is never like, oh yeah, let's eat some food. That's delicious. This is going to be great. It's always, oh, I have to put some shit down my throat to stay alive that I don't enjoy. So like a big part of my process with that has been, in which identifying as autistic has really helped me with, is just accepting that my relationship with food is different from other people, and that it's okay to have different relationships with food, especially relationships that are judged by other people. So like, basically I just eat whatever I want. because eating something is better than eating nothing, which is what's going to happen if I don't eat what I want. Because
well, it depends. If all you want to eat is sugar, then that's not better than nothing.
it is, though. It is.
Is it?
It is, because it's calories, right? It's energy. It is a way to get things done, right? If I don't eat, I'm not going to clean my house. I'm going to call out of work, right? I can't do certain things because I don't have any energy. But if I at least eat cereal 3 times a day, I can live a life that I want. And so the trade-off is health, right? The trade-off for living a better life is maybe living a shorter life. In theory, depending on how this might affect my health. It's like, I don't know, it's like choosing to smoke cigarettes. You may die from lung cancer or mouth cancer. You also might not. You also might live to 100. So I think we got to be really careful about how we make the decisions in our lives to enjoy our lives, the most. Like if I'm constantly just trying to force feed myself healthy things, for one thing, it might just not happen. And for another thing, if I do, I'm just not going to enjoy that ever. And so for me, I feel very empowered to make these decisions because they allow me to be happier in the present.
Well, thank you for sharing that perspective, because that has broadened my understanding of food. For me, like I said, I thought, it's, if you're just going to eat sugar, then that's not a good way to live. But like you're saying, it's a better way to live than not ingesting anything. So
yeah, and it's all about informed consent, like it's all about making decisions with information so that you can understand the whole picture and make those decisions comfortably. Like when I understand that the trade-off is my health, and I can know that I'm sacrificing happiness for suffering later, that's going to make that suffering later a lot easier. And so it's a lot easier for me to make that decision in the moment when I have that information and I know right, yes, I'm eating candy and this is bad for me in a certain way and has these certain health implications. It actually, for me, makes me more comfortable making those decisions to have that information and to be able to make those future projections.
So my nephew is 22 years old and ended up being rushed to the hospital last month with type 2 diabetes. And so, I guess he made a lot of decisions to eat a lot of sweet food. And now he is changing his way of eating so that he can live, live.
Yeah.
And he's on 2 forms of insulin now. So the choices that he made have led very quickly to show him the results of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so that's the balance, is I do value longevity in a way. Right. There is a part of me that wants to work towards that. And there's also a part of me that understands that in the moment, I'm just not at that place, right, where I can eat all these healthy foods and have this balanced lifestyle. So I think that for people who are in that place, it's really helpful to have compassion for yourself, for where you're at in that process. And that's what safe foods and autistic and all these terms have allowed me to do, is accept where I'm at and also work towards change. That's a really big principle in dialectical behavior therapy, where you accept where you're at, as well as the ability to change.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And so I do work on my relationship with food, both through processing my trauma and finding different ways to get my nutrition. But it's still in the process. I'm still kind of living unhealthily, but working towards that area of longevity. Like Enough is a really cool product that I've been experimenting with, which is like ground up fine nutritional powder made of vegetables. And you can put it on like anything, and it is like odorless, tasteless, textureless.
Wow.
So it's like really palatable and a good way to get nutrition from vegetables.
Do you like gummies?
Oh yeah.
So we use Juice Plus. I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
I have, yeah.
Okay. So I discovered it, I want to say about 22 years ago. And so I eat the gummies. I don't like the capsules, but so you're getting your fruits and your vegetables that way, eating gummies. So that might be another option for you to get some additional fruits and vegetables into your body.
Yeah, that's cool. I didn't know they had gummies.
Yeah.
I have a friend who worked for Juice Plus before.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'll share because I'm signed up as a whatever the term is. I sign up for all of those things so I can get discounts. But I'll give you the link to it so cool. That if you're interested, you can give it a try. And yeah, I find that my kids have lived very healthy lives. And I attribute that to the Juice Plus, because my younger two kids, it has been in their lives, most of their lives. And my youngest son has only taken antibiotics once in his life. And hardly ever gets sick. And, we aren't even great at taking it every day because I forget about doing that. And now I find myself going and just eating a couple of gummies in the middle of the day when I'm craving something sweet, because the older I get, the harder it is to take off the weight. And I have definite sugar addictions. So I try to stave off my sugar addictions in the middle of the day with my Juice Plus, nice. Which I recently heard that people with ADHD tend to be more drawn to sugar, I guess, because we're missing something, in our makeup that makes us crave sugar more.
Yeah, maybe
it's
that dopamine release we get from eating it that, our brain is really craving.
Yeah. Which, like you're talking about, it made me feel a little bit better understanding that, because I have other addiction issues and sugar is the hardest one for me to give up. So
yeah, it's hardcore.
Yeah.
I mean, especially with the way that our society pushes it and everything. It's hard to avoid sugar. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Joshua, this has been so amazing. I really appreciate your candidly talking to me, and I wish you all the best on your journey, starting your practice and, working through your challenges and helping other people work through their challenges.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity and all of your questions.